A while back, I made some videos in which I suggested certain routes that I would like to see developed as add-ons for Train Sim World, be they from Dovetail Games themselves or a third-party developer, and I thought I'd try making that sort of video again. For the sake of simplicity, I will only include 3 suggestions this time, one from the United Kingdom, one from New Zealand, and one from Australia. There are other suggestions that I wanted to mention in this video, but they would require using other people's footage, and I don't want to risk any copyright issues. For reference, the routes in question include, but are not limited to, the Cascais line in Portugal, another Portuguese route in the form of the Douro Valley line, lines A and C of the Lyon Metro in France, line M1 of the Budapest Metro in Hungary, and the Grange, Port Dock and Outer Harbour lines in Adelaide, Australia. For my first suggestion in this video, I propose the line from Crewe to Llandudno, starting out in England and crossing the border into Wales between Chester and Prestatyn. This route is around 96 kilometres or 60 miles long, with intermediate stops at Chester, Shotton Low Level, Flint, Prestatyn, Rhyl, Abergele and Pensan, Colwyn Bay, Llandudno Junction and Digunwi. I like the coastal section west of Prestatyn, and the seaside town of Llandudno is significant to me on a personal level because I stayed there during my UK trip, albeit for only one night. While we were in Llandudno, we had a run-in with a really feckin' big seagull who tried to steal our chips. Closer to the station, there was this interesting looking chocolate shop, but it wasn't open while we were in the town. Seeing as TSW routes generally only include one train these days, I think a Crewe to Llandudno route should come with just the Class 197 Civity DMU in Transport for Wales colours, and it would need to include both the 2 and 3 car variants of course. The Class 805, which is being developed for TSW by All Aboard Studios, could also have a timetable mode layer on a Crewe to Llandudno route, thus giving people an opportunity to run the 805 in diesel mode. Speaking of All Aboard Studios, players would also be able to use the route hopping feature at Crewe, and to continue on to Birmingham once they've brought in a train from Llandudno. Another idea for motive power would be to make a Transport for Wales variant of the Class 158, seeing as 158s can still be seen on the North Wales coastline from time to time. You could also have the Class 20 and Nuclear Flask wagons, from the upcoming Cargo Line Volume 5 add-on, as a layer to represent the occasional trains to and from the sidings at Valley, which is a short station just before Holyhead and close to a nuclear power station, although those Nuclear Flask trains would only be drivable in-game as far west as Llandudno Junction. Thinking back to Transport for Wales, the Class 197 normally runs hourly services from Manchester Piccadilly to Llandudno, or vice versa, along with a shuttle between Llandudno and Llandudno Junction. Meanwhile, there's another shuttle that only runs between Crewe and Chester, for which you could use the Class 150 or Class 153 from Cardiff City Network. One last thing before moving on to the next proposal. I've just realised that Class 197 and TSW 6 would need working announcements, which would need to be tested properly prior to release. In real life, the announcements on the 197s are read in both Welsh and English, and one can only imagine how the AI voices would sound when trying to speak Welsh.
Byddwn yn teithio I cyffordd Llandudno.
We will be travelling to Llandudno Junction.
The second proposal is my local line, the East Coast Main Trunk in New Zealand. The ECMT branches off the North Island Main Trunk in Hamilton and runs through to the coastal city of Tauranga, complete with branches diverging from the main line at Ruakura and Morrinsville. The branches go down to Hautapu and across to Waitoa respectively. If you include the Mount Maunganui branch, then the mainline route coverage would be 110 kilometres long, with the Hautapu and Waitoa branches adding a total of 26 kilometres to the route coverage. Starting out in the city of Hamilton, you'll go through a busy urban area which features a short tunnel under the city centre and a bridge over the Waikato River. Then you'll go past the huge industrial site at Ruakura, which was only completed within the last 4 years, past the junction with the Kinleith branch at Waharoa and into the Kaimai Tunnel. The tunnel opened in 1978 as part of a deviation to replace the old line through Waihi and the Tauranga Hakea Gorge, and at 8.879 kilometres long, it's the longest railway tunnel in New Zealand. Upon exiting the tunnel, the railway then runs through an area known for its kiwifruit orchards and often horrendous traffic congestion on State Highway 2. The city of Tauranga is a good place to visit if you like going to the beach, and it's also home to the largest export port in New Zealand. KiwiRail are kept very busy running freight trains to and from the port, but unfortunately, the East Coast main trunk is a freight-only line, as the last regular passenger services to Tauranga ceased in 2001. In terms of motive power, I think a Hamilton to Tauranga plus Waitoa and Hautapu route add-on would have to include 3 diesel locomotive types, not just one because that would be ridiculous. You would need the relatively modern DL class of 2010 for the mainline freight services, the older DSG class of 1982 for shunting at Hamilton's Te Rapa yard, or occasionally venturing out to Hautapu and Waitoa, and the even older DC class, built in the 1960s and rebuilt in the late 70s and early 80s, as the dominant motive power for services to Hautapu and Waitoa. As for freight rolling stock, you could include the IDA flatbed wagons for the Hautapu and Waitoa services, along with the IM and IPA flatbeds for the mainline trains. Most of the trains between Hamilton and Tauranga carry containers, but there is at least one exception in the form of a once-daily service from the Mission Bush steel mill to Mount Maunganui. For that, you would need the JPS, JT and JF wagons. In summary, I think this would make a good route concept for Train Sim World because New Zealand has never been represented in the game before, and Hamilton to Tauranga would A. present people with another 3-foot 6-inch gauge route alongside the Tadami line, B. have a decent amount of service and motive power variation, and C. the presence of a really long tunnel, and by extension, this bridge in central Tauranga, could make for a good selling point. Indeed, the line is quite scenic this side of the Kaimai Tunnel. My third and final proposal, for this video at least, is the Craigieburn Line on the suburban network in Melbourne, Australia. The line uses 5-foot 3-inch gauge track, and trying to work out its length was a bit confusing, since Melbourne doesn't have a dead-end terminus in their city centre. Instead, there are big through stations by the names of Southern Cross and Flinders Street, along with an underground section built in the 1980s, and known as the City Loop. If you start out from Flinders Street and go direct via Southern Cross, then the route to Craigieburn is 27 kilometres long, with intermediate stops at North Melbourne, Kensington, Newmarket, Ascot Vale, Moonee Ponds, Essendon, Glenbervie, Strathmore, Pascoe Vale, Oak Park, Glenroy, Jacana, Broadmeadows, Coolaroo and Roxburgh Park. On a personal note, Moonee Ponds was our local station during our Melbourne trip in June 2024, and come to think of it, you could also add the short branch from Newmarket to Flemington Racecourse, which would only add 2.3 kilometres to the route coverage. If the Craigieburn line was ever developed as a TSW add-on, I wouldn't be surprised if the route ended up set in the present day, with Metro Trains Melbourne as the operator of suburban services. To make it more interesting, perhaps the route could be set in the 1950s or 1960s. In those days, the City Loop hadn't yet opened, suburban trains terminated at Broadmeadows, or Broady for short, and the older Tate EMUs of 1919 were still going strong alongside the newer Harris EMUs of 1956. As much as I like the more recent Comenge and Extrapolis 100 trains, I think it would be more interesting to drive older trains like the Tate and Harris. Come to think of it, setting the route in an older time period would also mean that you could include the massive Jolimont Yard and workshops east of Flinders Street, which were all demolished in the 1980s and 1990s. Incidentally, this footage shows the area once occupied by Jolimont Yard. It was recorded aboard a high-capacity metro train, or HCMT for short, during a long trek from Flinders Street out to East Pakenham. Besides the passenger services, there would also be potential to run freight services to and from the small industrial site at Kensington. I'm not sure what locomotive type would be suitable for a 50s or 60s era Kensington grain shunt, aside from maybe the Victorian Railways T-Class of 1955. Any Australian rail fans watching can add more suggestions in the comments, and while I'm at it, I recommend watching Taitset's video on the Kensington grain shunt if you want to learn more about it. Australia has been neglected in both Train Simulator Classic and Train Sim World for far too long. Although this country has all sorts of interesting, or in some cases downright wacky, railway lines, I think a suburban line in Melbourne would be a good way to start off simple instead of doing something overly ambitious. In saying that, I can't think of any examples for route concepts that could be considered as overly ambitious. And there you have it, a trio of route suggestions for Train Sim World 6. Or subsequent sequels, seeing as it looks like Dovetail seems intent on doing annual releases until the cows come home. I believe each of the three proposals discussed in this video would make the game a little better in their own unique ways, especially where the New Zealand and Australian routes are concerned. I do not use the DTG forums myself, so if anyone would like to share this video over there on my behalf, that would be much appreciated. Here's hoping that at least one of my proposals makes it to TSW someday.